Hello true believers. Welcome to the spoiler discussion for the third issue of the Sentry Volume 3. I will skip the first 5 pages, since I've covered those in my preview video for the third issue. Before we dive into the spoiler discussion, I should mention that we will get all of the 5 issues of the third volume as a paperback in January of 2019. Also, the 5th issue loses Kim Jacinto as the main artist. Instead, the co-artist Joshua Cassara will draw the entire issue. But to be honest with you, I don't know why issues 2 and 3 had Kim Jacinto listed as the main artist in the first place, considering that Joshua Cassara drew much more pages. It feels like 90% of the third issue has been drawn by Joshua Cassara. If you ask me, he should be credited as the main artist in issues 2 and 3. We will have to wait and see who drew more pages for the 4th issue. I'm also curious if the art was one of the reasons why the book got cancelled. Kim Jacinto was announced for the then still ongoing series, but in an interview Kim stated that he had just become a new father and that he was also dealing with being sick. So he didn't have as much time as usual to draw. If we are lucky, then the book wasn't straight up cancelled, but only postponed. The new Iron Man book has also been postponed by a whole month. We will have to wait and see. And pray. Pray to your gods, I say. Jesus, Buddha, Allah, Tom Cruise or Krishna. I don't give a fuck who you worship, just ask them to bless the Sentry comic. But for now, let us start with the spoiler discussion. In the preview video I made a joke about the big ugly nose behind Billy and the human attached to it. But considering how Tom Brevoort, the editor of the comic, is making a cameo appearance, that nose monster might be an actual person as well. If that is the case, then it would be only appropriate if I apologized. But I won't. The story continues with Billy and Cranio talking about the return of the Sentry, the loss of their powers and their shitty lives. Billy clearly states that he is jealous of Bob's ability to become the Sentry every night, while he himself has to live a mundane life. Billy wants to replace Bob and become the new Sentry. He hopes to achieve that by replicating the enhanced version of the super soldier serum, which turned Bob into the Sentry many years ago. But Billy requires the help of Cranio, who is a genius and could help him with the replication of the Sentry serum. Cranio, however, is certain that, while he is smart, he is nowhere near as smart as Professor Cornelius, who created the serum, and that replicating the serum is impossible. It is in that moment that Billy pulls out the personal notes of the professor, which contain the formula for the serum. What we have seen here is very interesting, because it is a retcon to the origin of the serum. And to be honest, it is not a very good retcon. Up until now the professor didn't invent the serum. The serum was an accident. It started off as a serum, which was meant to be 100,000 times stronger than Captain America's version of the serum, but it was handed over from one scientist to another, until they completely lost track of the entire project. In the end it landed in the hands of the professor, who pretty much also abandoned it. When Bob found this abandoned and untested version of the serum, he consumed it and became the Sentry. The professor and S.H.I.E.L.D. found out about the Sentry and tried to contain and even kill him, since he was getting more powerful with each day. The following serum shots Sentry took were all poison, which completely failed to cause him any harm. But with this retcon now the origin of the serum becomes more in sync with the origin of the serum in the non-canon story The Age of the Sentry. In that story the professor had created the serum on his own. That non-canon story is the same story in which we saw Cranio for the first time. Cranio eagerly looks through the personal notes of the professor, realizing what he will be able to create thanks to them. Billy is just interested in the serum and offers Cranio protection and a free path back to his full glory. In return Billy only wants a steady supply of the serum, so that he can stay the new Sentry. While Billy and Cranio are making plans for world domination in the middle of the day in a crowded diner, the guy behind Billy, whose nose takes up 80% of his entire face, is making a phone call. If this was a how it should have ended video, that humanoid nose would be talking to the police, and Billy and Cranio would be in prison on the next page, arguing about who has to pick up the soap next. But since this is a comic book, logic is thrown out of the window and we see Billy and Cranio pursuing their next step. They go to a department store to pick up Cranius' old equipment. An important part of the equipment turns out to be Cranius' helmet, which enhances his mental powers. Cranio accidentally invades Billy's mind, who gets upset and threatens to kill Cranio. It is here where we learn that Cranio is a little pussy ass bitch, since he is terrified. Cranio apologizes to Billy and promises to never do it again. I don't quite understand why Cranio is so apologetic about an accidental mistake. And even if it wasn't accidental, he is the guy with 2 arms, mental powers and other equipments. I don't know what keeps him from kicking Billy's butt, replicating the serum on his own, and turning himself into the Sentry. Anyway, Cranio starts working on the Sentry serum, a process which takes him multiple weeks. During that time Billy talks about how he has to deal with Bob, listen to his stories about being the Sentry, and pretend to be happy for him. We see how bitter Billy has really become over the years. He is at a point where he is willing to kill Bob and the Sentry in order to become the Sentry himself. Cranio finishes the serum, which initiates the last phase of the evil plan. Billy goes to Bob's home, breaks in, and steals the confluctor device. In Bob's apartment we see a couple of pictures hanging on the wall. One is of the Sentry, one is of Bob, and the Slender Man, I guess. Then there is also an award for being the Employee of the Month. Did Jenny give the award to Bob? Did Bob give it to Jenny? If you know what I'm saying. Did Jenny give it to Bob after Bob gave it to her? If you know what I'm saying. Do you notice something else about this panel? Billy has 2 arms again. The art and editing are on point as always. Billy and Cranio intend to use the confluctor to enter Sentry World and kill the Sentry in the void. But in Sentry World something goes wrong. Cranio comes across Bob, even though he was expecting to meet the Sentry. Cranio is smart enough to put 1 and 1 together and get the hell out of Sentry World. He informs Billy about what he saw, who then also realizes that with Bob being in Sentry World, the Sentry might very well be in the real world. Billy knows that Sentry can't be too far away and injects Cranius' version of the Sentry serum. Billy starts screaming, yet immediately gets his shit together and refers to himself as the only Sentry while his eyes are glowing in a golden light. Wow. This might not be a big, shocking cliffhanger, but it is still very interesting because it opens up so many questions. Is Billy's version of the serum as potent as Sentry's? With Billy not struggling with mental issues, does he have more power than the Sentry? With Sentry being able to regenerate from any injury, will Billy be able to regrow his arm? The preview for the next issue states that Sentry comes face to face with one of his oldest enemies, and that his only salvation might be his damaged ex-sidekick Scout. That would imply that Sentry should face Cranio next, but given how this issue ended, I don't find that to be very likely. And considering how the plot points were wrong for the 3rd issue regarding Sentry fighting Iron Man, the plot of the 4th issue might head into a different direction as well. The preview for the 5th issue states that both Bob Reynolds and Sentry are dead and that something new has to rise in their place. Right now I can't imagine at all what that might be, which is why I can't wait for the next issues to come out. In the spoiler-free review I've complained about the pacing of the book quite a bit. I did it because the first 3 issues focused a lot on character development. And that is a good thing, but only if you have more than just 5 issues. Bob living 2 different lives could have been an entire arc. Cranio returning could have been an entire arc as well. Billy Turner turning evil and gaining Sentry powers again could have been an entire arc as well. But all of these plot points have unfortunately been crammed into 5 issues. I'm not sure if 2 issues are enough for the conclusion of the story we've gotten so far. In the worst case scenario the story will end up being either very anticlimactic or very open-ended. Another important aspect of superhero comics, but also stories about heroes in general, is the hero's journey trope. According to that trope a hero goes on an adventure, suffers a devastating defeat, but comes back stronger during that time of crisis, ultimately wins and returns home as a stronger and better version. Every good hero story follows that pattern. And if you think about the pacing of the 3 Sentry issues so far, and what could happen in the next 2 issues, Sentry's hero journey should strike you as somewhat uneven. But maybe I'm reading way too much into all of this. We will just have to wait and see how Sentry's story continues. Until then, have a nice day, and as always, stay vigilant.